Welcome, travelers of time and myth, to Forgotten Scrolls. Tonight we journey into the heart of ancient Greece, to the shimmering peaks of Mount Olympus, where the mighty gods and goddesses shape the very fabric of existence. Have you ever wondered about the powerful deities who ruled the skies, the seas, and the underworld, and how their passions, rivalries, and wisdom still echo in our world? This is a story for those who seek to understand the divine threads woven into the tapestry of human civilization. If you yearn for calm and wonder, allowing your mind to drift into realms of myth and legend, you have found your sanctuary. Here, we will delve into the profound narratives of the Olympians, not merely as characters of old, but as archetypes whose stories resonate with the deepest questions of purpose, power, and destiny. Prepare to close your eyes and let the tranquil narration carry you across sun-drenched landscapes and through the halls of divine power. This journey is designed to soothe your mind, allowing you to relax, reflect, and drift into peaceful slumber while absorbing the timeless wisdom of Greek mythology. We will explore their origins, their intertwined lives, their divine attributes, and their lasting influence on art, philosophy, and the human spirit. So settle in, breathe deeply, and allow the whispers of antiquity to guide you. For in the tales of these powerful gods, you may find reflections of your own inner world and the quiet inspiration you seek. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Forgotten Scrolls for a new journey every day. Now let us begin our exploration of the mighty Olympians, starting with the tempestuous ruler of the deep. Chapter 1. Poseidon, Lord of the Seas and Shaker of Earth. Poseidon, the formidable Lord of the Seas, is certainly one of the most renowned and revered Olympian gods. Known also by his Latin name, Neptune, a name he carried in Rome, Poseidon's dominion over the oceans was established after the Titanomachy, the great war between gods and titans. Through a lottery, the realm of the seas was allocated to him, a domain previously ruled by the elder deities Nereus and Oceanus. Despite holding a seat on Mount Olympus, the mighty god preferred to reside in his grand underwater palace. Poseidon was never without his inseparable trident, a weapon that granted him the power to conjure earthquakes, create springs, and bring forth fresh water sources. This powerful weapon was forged by the Cyclops during the war against the Titans and would become one of his primary symbols. The god of the seas would parade across the waters in his chariot, pulled by magnificent white horses. Behind him, a grand procession would form, comprised of sea creatures and lesser divinities. Though primarily a marine deity, Poseidon's influence extended far beyond his aquatic domains. He was also the lord of earthquakes, and thus, it was not uncommon for the earth to tremble when the god was in a fit of rage. Even far from the sea, inland Greek cities were not immune to Poseidon's influence. They could suffer from tremors, or even be afflicted by severe droughts when a water spring dried up, signaling that the region lacked Poseidon's blessings. The god of the seas was a highly temperamental deity. Therefore, those whose livelihoods depended on the sea, such as sailors, merchants, and fishermen, would make numerous offerings and sacrifices to the god. Their hope was to ensure safe passage through his waters and a secure return to their families. However, such sacrifices did not guarantee the desired graces, for when furious, the god made no distinction between devotees and non-devotees. All who dared to venture into his domains while he was in a foul mood were liable to be swallowed by the sea. Seeing his brother's instability hindered the natural order of things, Zeus decided that Poseidon needed a wife. Thus, Poseidon united with the Nereid Amphitrite, who would become the Queen of the Seas. Winning her was no easy task, but Poseidon received invaluable help from the dolphin Delphin, who convinced Amphitrite to join his master. With Amphitrite, Poseidon had his son Triton, who would also be a sea deity. Like Zeus, Poseidon also had numerous extramarital affairs. But, fortunately for his illegitimate children and lovers, Amphitrite, despite her jealousy, was nowhere near as vengeful as Zeus's wife, Hera. Besides Triton, the god fathered several illustrious children. With Medusa, he had Pegasus and the giant Chrysaor. With Aethra, he had the famous hero Theseus. The god was also the father of a new race of Cyclops, among whom the most famous was Polyphemus. Polyphemus had his single eye pierced by Odysseus, and for this reason, Poseidon would relentlessly pursue the king of Ithaca, preventing Odysseus from returning home after his victory in the Trojan War. Poseidon is also known for his rivalry with his niece, the goddess Athena. The animosity between the god and the goddess grew due to a dispute to determine which deity would be the patron of the city that was the capital of Attica. Athena emerged victorious in this dispute, which had to be arbitrated by the other gods. The city would become known by the name of Athens. In another episode, Poseidon violated Medusa within the temple consecrated to Athena. The young Medusa was one of the temple's priestesses and was punished for defiling the sacred ground. Medusa, who was once a beautiful young woman, was transformed into the creature we know today. Poseidon also played an important role in the rebellion against Zeus. He, along with Apollo, imprisoned Zeus. The attempted coup failed, and Poseidon was punished alongside Apollo. The two were forced to build the powerful walls of Troy. However, due to the ingratitude of King Laomedon of Troy, who refused to reward him, the god began to harbor resentment towards him and his descendants. For this reason, Poseidon favored the Greeks during the Trojan War. In the ancient Greek city of Corinth, the Isthmian Games were celebrated, a type of Olympic Games dedicated to the rare god Poseidon. Also in Corinth, there are accounts of an enormous bronze colossus honoring the Lord of the Seas. In modern times, Poseidon may not be as widely worshipped as he once was, but he is undoubtedly still one of the most admired gods in Greek mythology. Chapter 2. Apollo, the radiant archer. Apollo is one of the most important gods in Greek mythology, and thus has always been one of the most revered. He is the son of Zeus and the goddess Leto, and the twin brother of Artemis, the goddess of the hunt. The divine siblings were born on the legendary floating island of Delos, which, after being anchored to the ocean floor, became one of Greece's most sacred places. The god is often depicted holding his lyre or carrying his famous bow. Artists have always been very generous in their representations of Apollo, for in myths, the god is always described as a figure of unparalleled beauty, symbolizing the Greek ideal of masculine beauty. Apollo had a youthful appearance, was tall, strong, and charming. Yet, despite all these qualities, he did not have good fortune in love. A large part of his relationships ended in tragedies, and in other cases his affection was unrequited, as with Daphne and Cassandra, both of whom rejected Apollo. The nymph Daphne, to escape the god's advances, was transformed into a laurel tree. The plant would be consecrated to the god, and the laurel crown would become one of his symbols. Cassandra, who had the power to foresee the future, was cursed for rejecting the god. Despite being able to see the future, she was stripped of the power of persuasion, and thus, even when her prophecies were true, no one believed them. Apollo is a god with diverse attributes. He is considered the god of light, of prophecies, of medicine, of the arts, and of archers, among other attributions. He is also the god of music with his inseparable lyre, given to him by Hermes. Apollo enchanted the muses while plucking his instrument on Mount Helicon. With the muse Calliope, he had his son Orpheus, who inherited much of his father's musical talent. Apollo's cult spread rapidly throughout Greece. The god of light gained such importance that he came to be identified as the solar deity, usurping the post that traditionally belonged to the Titan Helios. The god is also known as an exceptional archer. When he reached maturity, he set out to seek vengeance against the serpent Python, who pursued his mother at Hera's command while he and his sister were still infants. Apollo faced the terrible serpent and struck it down with his arrows. The temple of Apollo in Delphi was built over the place where Python fell. There, Apollo's priestesses, known as Pythia or Pythonesses, performed prophetic rituals under Apollo's influence. As the god of prophecy, Delphi became a place of pilgrimage, for many sought counsel at Apollo's oracle. The god is also a deity connected to medicine. His son Asclepius became a healer so skilled that through his curative arts he could ward off death. But Apollo also has a sinister side. The god is linked to plagues and epidemics. During the Trojan War, the god afflicted the Greeks with plague because they had treated one of Apollo's priests with extreme disrespect, as he wished to redeem his daughter captured in the war. Apollo lent support to the Trojan warriors, and it was thanks to the god's aid that Paris was able to shoot a precise arrow into the heel of the warrior Achilles, his only weak point. The god was known as Phoebus, the brilliant one, and was also greatly worshipped. As the god of prophecy, Apollo used his powers as a link between men and gods. Through his oracles, the god revealed Zeus's designs to men and also unveiled the destiny spun by the fates. When Apollo cast light upon something, all lies dissolved, leaving only the purest truth. Thus, the god came to be associated with the pursuit of truth, which is why he was honored by ancient philosophers. The importance of Apollo ensured that his cult endured for centuries, even after the Roman Empire adopted Christianity. But even when no longer actively worshipped, Apollo continued to be referenced by painters, sculptors, and poets who never ceased to pay homage to the god who was the patron of the arts. Chapter 3. Hades, Lord of the Underworld. Hades, the Lord of the Underworld, along with Poseidon and Zeus, completes the trinity of the great Olympian gods. In ancient Rome, the god is known by the name Pluto or Dis. His Roman name refers to the god's wealth, for the god of the underworld is also the holder of all the riches found beneath the earth, such as gold, silver, and precious stones, which made Hades the wealthiest of the gods. The name Hades, meanwhile, means the unseen one. While he fought alongside the other Olympian gods in the battle against the Titans, he was gifted by the Cyclops with the Helmet of Darkness. This artifact conferred upon its wearer the power of invisibility. Hades used his helmet to infiltrate enemy lines and stealthily attack the Titan armies. After the victory of his brothers, the world was divided. The god was assigned to reign over the underworld, a place where the souls of the dead were received for their final rest or to be punished for all eternity. Hades always dedicated himself diligently to his work, and for this reason, it was rare for the god to visit the surface. Despite having a place on the council of the Olympian gods, his seat was usually empty. On one of his few visits to the world of men, Hades, from his chariot pulled by powerful black horses, abducted Persephone, the goddess of spring, and took her to his underground palace. The young goddess was the daughter of Demeter, the goddess of harvest and soil fertility. Hades offered Persephone pomegranate seeds, and by accepting them, she forged an indissoluble bond with her new husband. Demeter could not overcome the loss of her daughter and threatened to leave the earth infertile and frozen forever. Under this threat, a compromise was reached for Persephone's custody. Part of the year she would remain with her husband, and the other part she would return to the company of her mother. This myth explained the origin of the seasons, for when Persephone was with her husband, the goddess Demeter neglected her duties, and autumn and winter would begin. When mother and daughter reunited, flowers bloomed again with the arrival of spring. Persephone would become the queen of the underworld alongside her husband, and the couple would reign over the dead. Hades was aided in his tasks of governing the world by various other divinities. Among them were the three infernal judges, Minos, Iacchus, and Rhadamanthus, who judged souls. And the Erinyes, also known as Furies, helped in administering punishments to criminals. Hades rarely interfered in the affairs of men or the affairs of the gods. One of the few times Hades turned his attention to the surface was when King Sisyphus of Corinth deceived death with his cunning. Thanatos, the god who personifies death, was imprisoned by the king, and for this reason, no one died, and Hades ceased to receive new subjects. The lord of the underworld himself was also deceived by the cunning mortal. Despite all his cleverness, Sisyphus could not deceive the gods forever, and for his crimes, he was condemned to a terrible punishment in Tartarus that would last for all eternity. One of Hades' few visits to Olympus occurred when the god was wounded by Hercules and therefore had to seek healing among the gods for nectar and ambrosia to mend his wounds. In art, the god is commonly represented with a serious countenance, holding his bident or fork, and in the company of Cerberus, the infernal dog whose function is to guard the entrance to his master's realm. In antiquity, the god was treated with immense respect. Greeks avoided uttering his name as much as possible, and when performing sacrifices, they tried not to look at the altar, as they wished to postpone the inevitable encounter with the god. Despite generally being depicted as a villain in films like Clash of the Titans and Disney's Hercules, Hades is not a malevolent figure. In fact, there are various records where the god behaves benevolently, such as when he allows Orpheus to return to the world of the living with his beloved Eurydice, or when he accepts Persephone's request to spend time with her mother. However, the god was truly implacable with those who committed grave sins. These were cast into Tartarus and suffered terrible torments. Hades is not known for his marital infidelity, unlike Zeus and Poseidon. But he is no saint either. The god did get involved with some nymphs. The most famous of these was the beautiful and proud nymph known as Mythical. She aroused the wrath of Persephone and Demeter and was therefore transformed into the plant known as mint from the mint family. The god had a reduced number of descendants, with Macaria, the goddess of good death, being the most famous. The fact that he is a god who inspires both fear and fascination is what makes Hades one of the most interesting gods in Greek mythology. Chapter 4. Hera, Queen of Olympus. Hera is the famous Queen of Olympus, reigning alongside her husband Zeus, the supreme god of the universe. She rules over the heavens from her golden throne. The goddess is the youngest daughter of the Titan Cronus and the Titaness Rhea. Like most of her siblings, she was also swallowed by her father, for the Titan feared being dethroned by them. Hera was freed by Zeus from her father's stomach, and according to some accounts, the goddess came to live on the island of Samos, where she was cared for by Tethys and had the Horae, seasons, as her ladies-in-waiting. In many accounts, she is described as the most beautiful among all goddesses. Due to such beauty, Zeus fell madly in love with her. Hera resisted Zeus's advances, who tried every means to seduce the goddess. However, the goddess ended up being conquered by one of Zeus's many tricks, as he transformed into a cuckoo to win her over. Hera came to reign alongside Zeus, and most poets granted her the highest honors, for in terms of prestige, Hera was only second to Zeus. The goddess would become the divinity associated with marriages and motherhood. With her husband, Hera had illustrious children such as Ares, the god of war, Hebe, the goddess of youth, Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, and Hephaestus, the god of the forge. According to some versions of the myths, Hera supposedly gave birth to Hephaestus without Zeus's participation. But upon realizing she had given birth to an imperfect son, she repudiated him and hurled him from the top of Olympus towards the ocean. The reconciliation between mother and son occurred after Hera fell into a trap elaborated by Hephaestus, who presented her with a golden throne. The goddess sat on the throne, but upon trying to stand, she realized she was trapped. Hera could only free herself after reinstating Hephaestus as one of the Olympian gods. The Queen of the Heavens is a deity linked to fidelity, but her husband could not be more different. Zeus had countless extramarital relationships, and each of them awakened immense fury in his wife. Zeus's lovers became targets of the betrayed wife's wrath, and many of them faced terrible reprisals. The children born from these illicit unions were persecuted by the goddess. Hercules is the most famous of Zeus's illegitimate children, and certainly also one of the most persecuted. The goddess caused the hero to be overcome by madness, and during his period of insanity, he ended up killing his wife and children. And not only Zeus's illegitimate children and lovers were targets of Hera's divine wrath. The goddess came to hate the Trojans after the Trojan prince Paris chose Aphrodite as the most beautiful of the goddesses, to the detriment of Athena and Hera. This episode became known as the Judgment of Paris. In retaliation, the goddess did everything in her power to harm Troy during the conflict against the Greeks. Even with Troy's destruction, Hera still persecuted the hero Aeneas, who was the heir to the Trojan tradition. He was pursued throughout his journey, from his escape from Troy until his arrival on the Italian peninsula. But there were also heroes who were graced with the goddess's blessings. The most famous of them is Jason. The goddess Hera protected and inspired the hero in his adventures in search of the Golden Fleece. At a certain point, Zeus's constant betrayals surpassed the limits of his wife's patience, and so Hera orchestrated a rebellion on Olympus against Zeus. The attempted coup failed, and for this, the goddess was punished and imprisoned. Zeus only freed her after she swore never to rebel again. In ancient Greece, Hera was one of the most worshipped goddesses. Her temples were spread throughout the Greek world. Married women and pregnant women paid her special devotion. Along with Hestia, Hera was very present in domestic cults. The peacock and the cuckoo are two animals consecrated in honor of the goddess. The peacock, with its vibrant tail feathers, carries the eyes of Argus, Hera's loyal servant who died in service while performing a mission for the goddess. The Queen of the Heavens is known by the name Juno in Roman mythology. There, alongside her husband Jupiter, Hera was referenced. The goddess Hera is admired by many and hated by others who cannot tolerate her vengeful temperament, but few can remain indifferent when we speak of the goddess, which makes her one of the most important goddesses in Greek mythology. Chapter 5. Hermes, Messenger of the Gods. Hermes is the famous messenger of the Olympian gods. The god carries messages from the gods to all corners of the universe using his winged sandals, produced by Hephaestus. He traverses the heavens with incredible speed. No place is beyond his reach. Hermes is capable of venturing into the depths of the ocean and even the world of the dead. He is the son of Zeus and Maia, daughter of the Titan Atlas. Soon after his birth, still a baby, he was already venturing into the world with his playful tricks. He had barely learned to walk when he stole Apollo's cattle. The radiant god searched for the thief of his livestock and was surprised to encounter that ingenious infant. Hermes and Apollo eventually became great friends. The messenger god presented Apollo with the lyre, which would become one of the symbols of the god of music. The god of light reciprocated the gift by giving Hermes his famous caduceus. Using his caduceus, Hermes guided the souls of those who had departed to Hades' realm. The god became one of the main Olympian gods. He came to be considered the god of cunning, of travelers, of merchants, and also of thieves. Countless myths feature Hermes. In many of them, the god acts as a guide, as he is famous for knowing the best paths to any destination. Hermes guided Perseus in his adventure after Medusa. In other stories, the god guided famous characters to the world of the dead. He led Demeter to her daughter Persephone, who had been abducted by Hades, and also Orpheus in his search for his beloved Eurydice. At the roadside that crossed Greece, it was common to find totems, dedicated to the god of travelers and merchants. They prayed to the god for a safe journey to their destination. As the god of merchants, he was honored by those who sought prosperity in their businesses, and the caduceus eventually became an international symbol of commerce. Hermes was also a brave god. He faced giants during the Gigantomachy, exterminated Argus, the dangerous hundred-eyed guardian, and rescued Ares, who had been imprisoned by the Aloati giants. Besides freeing Zeus when he was defeated by Typhon, he became one of Zeus's favorite sons alongside Athena. The supreme god's herald, Hermes, had several children with many lovers. One of the most famous is his son with Aphrodite, who became known as Hermaphroditus, a being of dual nature, having both feminine and masculine in one body. For his undeniable physical vigor, he was one of the most worshipped gods by ancient athletes. A statue of the god was almost obligatory in all Greek gymnasiums. In ancient Rome, the god was known by the name Mercury. There he was also worshipped by merchants, but due to his cunning mind and various tricks, the god was also adored by tricksters and thieves who counted on the god's aid to succeed in their schemes. Hermes is also considered the god of writing and eloquence. Therefore, in Greek-Egyptian syncretism, he is associated with the figure of the god Thoth, the Egyptian god who invented writing and is the patron of scribes. Generally, the god is represented as good-humored, but one would not want to see him angered. When Zeus and Hera were to marry, and Hermes was to deliver invitations to all guests, the lazy nymph Calliope did not attend the wedding due to her sloth and slowness. Zeus reprimanded Hermes, for the supreme god believed that Hermes had failed in his mission to deliver all invitations. Furious, Hermes punished the indolent nymph by transforming her into a turtle. The god of speed inspired the creation of pop culture characters like Flash from DC Comics and Quicksilver from Marvel. Thanks to his diverse attributes and his presence in various myths, Hermes is one of the most recognized figures in Greek mythology. Chapter 6. Artemis, Goddess of the Hunt. Artemis is known as the Goddess of the Hunt in Greek mythology. The goddess has the bow and arrow as one of her symbols, her favorite weapon. Therefore, the goddess is generally represented in art carrying her inseparable bow. Artemis is the daughter of Zeus and his lover Leto, and also the twin, sister of the god Apollo. But she was born a day before her brother and even helped her mother during Apollo's birth. When the divine couple were still babies, they and their mother were pursued by a terrible serpent known as Python. But such a creature was exterminated by Apollo when he reached maturity. One of Artemis's characteristics is that she is a virgin goddess. The goddess, from a very young age, made a vow of chastity. For having helped her mother in her brother's birth, it became a tradition for women in ancient Greece to pray for the goddess's assistance during childbirth. Despite being born in Delos, the island consecrated to the twin gods, Artemis considered the forests and mountains of Arcadia as her home. Artemis was considered the goddess of wildlife. She had a true love for the art of hunting, and so the goddess frequently roamed the forests in search of the most glorious prey. The goddess was accompanied by a procession of nymphs who served as her ladies-in-waiting. All her companions also had the duty to remain virgins and pure so as not to stain the image and reputation of the virgin goddess. Once, while the goddess and her nymphs were bathing in a spring, they were spotted by the hunter Actaeon. He was enchanted by the pristine beauty of the goddess of the hunt, but the goddess did not accept being violated by Actaeon's profane gaze upon her naked body, which no other entity had ever seen. The goddess transformed the hunter into a stag, and he was then pursued by his own hunting dogs who caught and tore him apart. As a good huntress, the goddess also had the company of her hunting dogs, from which no prey could hide. But the animal that best symbolizes the goddess of the hunt was the stag. Artemis captured some of them and harnessed them to her chariot. On her chariot, pulled by sacred stags, the goddess flew through the air. Agamemnon, the great leader of the Achaeans during the Trojan War, killed one of Artemis's sacred stags. And as if that were not enough, he claimed that not even the goddess of the hunt would be able to kill such an animal so precisely. This aroused Artemis's wrath, who, as punishment, prevented the Greek army from sailing to Troy. To reconcile with the goddess, Agamemnon had to sacrifice his beloved daughter Iphigenia, and only after such a sacrifice could the Greeks set sail for war. Another episode in which the goddess shows her implacable side is when the proud Niobe claims that her children were more beautiful than the descendants of the goddess Leto. Apollo and Artemis punished Niobe by striking down all her children with their precise arrows. According to some versions of the myth, Artemis had great affection for Orion, a giant hunter of great talent. But Orion ended up being killed by Artemis due to a trick by Apollo, who deceived the goddess out of jealousy of that relationship. In another version, Orion tried to violate Artemis, and for this, she sent a huge scorpion to end the giant's life. Artemis was also identified as a lunar goddess. Just as Apollo came to represent the sun in place of Helios, Artemis came to occupy the position of goddess of the moon in place of Selene. According to other versions, Artemis, Selene, and Hecate were all lunar goddesses, with each goddess having a different phase of the moon. Artemis is among the most worshipped Greek deities in ancient Greece. Various cities are consecrated in honor of the goddess, and countless temples were erected to worship the goddess throughout the Hellenic world. But undoubtedly the most famous is the glorious temple of Artemis in Ephesus. The magnificent temple was so majestic that it is on the list of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. In the Temple of Ephesus in Asia Minor, the goddess was worshipped differently, for there she was seen as a goddess of fertility, and her image with multiple breasts symbolized her ability to nourish humans. The goddess is worshipped in ancient Rome under the name Diana, her Latin name. Her main temple was on the Aventine Hill. With the expansion of the Roman Empire, her cult spread throughout Europe, even reaching the British Isles. According to some versions of the Arthurian legends, the famous Lady of the Lake was a descendant of Diana, the Roman goddess of the hunt. Artemis is an ambiguous goddess. Sometimes she can be generous and benevolent, but she can also be implacable and vengeful. This duality makes her one of the most interesting goddesses in Greek mythology. Chapter 7. Dionysus, god of wine and ecstasy. Dionysus, also known as Bacchus by the Romans, was the last god to join the court of the Olympian gods. He is considered the god of wine and ecstasy, but is also associated with harvests and fertility. The god's origin distinguishes him from all other Olympian deities, for Dionysus emerged from the union of Zeus with a mere mortal named Semele. Zeus and Semele shared a great love, but this aroused the wrath of the goddess Hera, Zeus's wife. The queen of Olympus conspired to destroy her rival, and disguised as Semele's maid, Hera convinced the young woman to ask Zeus to reveal himself to her in all his splendor. The goddess knew that the intense brilliance of the great god would be something no mortal could endure, and thus Semele was turned to ashes. What Hera did not know was that Semele was pregnant, and among the ashes lay the fruit of this divine union, Dionysus. Dionysus was not yet ready to come into the world, and so Zeus opened a gash in his own thigh and continued the gestation of the baby who would one day occupy a place on Olympus. Young Dionysus did not have an easy life, for from his earliest infancy, the future god was already persecuted by the goddess Hera. The goddess inflicted madness upon the young divine being, which made him wander the world until he was cured by the goddess Rhea, who was also known as Cybele. After being cured, the god Dionysus had the wise Silenus as his tutor, who was always by his pupil's side, mounted on his unmistakable donkey. The god was responsible for the invention of wine and the discovery of its cultivation. Dionysus taught men to cultivate grapes, and also the fermentation process necessary for wine production, which would come to be considered a sacred beverage. In his wanderings, the god passed through Greece, Egypt, and eventually reached India. Wherever he went, he spread his knowledge and began to accumulate followers. A large retinue would follow Dionysus wherever he went. Among his followers were nymphs, satyrs, and maenads, who were his priestesses, while Dionysus paraded in his chariot pulled by felines. When he was still young, Dionysus was abducted by pirates who believed that because he was so handsome, the god could only be the son of a king. Dionysus warned the pirates about who he truly was, but they did not believe him and only thought of the great ransom they would receive. As punishment, Dionysus transformed the pirates into dolphins, a type of porpoise. Dionysus had the grapevine, grapes, and the thyrsus, a staff with a pine cone at the tip, as his symbols. After wandering the world, the god returned to Greece. On the island of Naxos, he found the beautiful princess Ariadne, who had been left behind by Theseus. Dionysus took Ariadne as his wife, and with her he had several descendants. In his wanderings through Greece, Dionysus came to have his divinity recognized, and various temples were erected in honor of the god. However, his cult was still very exotic for most Greeks, and for this reason, the propagation of his cult faced considerable resistance. Even so, the god's cult successfully established itself in several Hellenic cities. Only after his cult consolidated in Greece could he ascend to the heavens and take a seat alongside the other Olympian gods. The benevolent goddess Hestia gave up her place on the council of the 12 Olympian gods. According to some versions, the goddess was already tired of the constant disputes among the gods. As an Olympian god, Dionysus descended to the underworld, where he convinced Queen Persephone to free his mother Semele's soul. Semele then came to live in the temple of Artemis and adopted the name Thyone. Dionysus's cult was full of dances, and people liberated themselves using alcohol and other substances. The use of masks in these ceremonies and the recreation of mythical events were traditional and at the root of the emergence of Greek theater. The Greeks began to consider Dionysus as the patron of the fine arts, and actors and playwrights would pay him special reverence. Near the Acropolis of Athens was the famous Theater of Dionysus, where the classic plays of Euripides, Aeschylus, and Sophocles were presented to the world. As already mentioned, in ancient Rome, Dionysus was revered by the name Bacchus. There, the god of wine and excess was honored in festivals known as Bacchanalia. Dionysus may have been the last god to join Olympus, but even so, the god of wine was able to exert a strong influence on Greco-Roman culture, and therefore, it is not surprising that Dionysus is still one of the most worshipped gods by those who today still revere the ancient Greek gods. Chapter 8. Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategic war. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, is one of the most prominent divinities in Greek mythology. The goddess had a unique origin. Zeus had swallowed his wife Metis when she was pregnant with Athena, for there was a prophecy that said Metis would have a son and a daughter with Zeus. The daughter would be a splendid divinity, but the son would be so powerful that he would dethrone Zeus. After swallowing his wife, Zeus began to suffer terrible headaches and asked for his head to be split open to investigate the cause of such pain. From the fissure that opened, the goddess Athena emerged, already armed and fully adult. Zeus was marveled by the daughter he conceived, and Athena came to be the supreme god's favorite daughter. Athena, despite being reserved, was one of the most beautiful goddesses on Olympus, but she chose not to succumb to the influences of the gods of love, and therefore remained a virgin for all eternity. The goddess possessed unparalleled intelligence, and so she was consulted by the other divinities whenever they needed a solution to their problems. But intelligence is not her only attribute worthy of reverence. The goddess also has unwavering courage. According to some versions, she was the only goddess who dared to remain by her father's side in the fight against the powerful monster Typhon. The other gods disguised themselves as animals and sought refuge in Egypt. Due to her sharp mind and courage in combat, Athena was considered the goddess of strategic warfare. Those who fought using their intelligence were blessed by Athena, while those who used brute force and cruelty were favored by Ares, another god of war. Athena sided with the Greeks during the Trojan War. She favored and inspired the warriors Diomedes and Achilles, but the goddess had a special affection for the cunning Odysseus. Athena stood by the warrior during the war and also protected the hero and his family until the warriors returned to his home in Ithaca. The city of Athens was consecrated in honor of the goddess, who earned such an honor after a dispute with Poseidon to win the favor of Attica's inhabitants. Athena offered the olive tree, a plant that would become one of the goddess's symbols. The episode only increased the rivalry between Athena and Poseidon. In retaliation, the god of the seas violated Medusa in Athena's temple. Medusa was a priestess of the goddess, and Athena was merciless with Medusa, transforming her into the creature we know today. Athena was also a great weaver, an activity cherished by women in ancient Greece. In a famous myth, a mortal named Arachne dared to proclaim that her embroideries were superior to the goddess Athena's own. The goddess and Arachne competed to see who was better. According to some versions, Arachne emerged victorious, but for daring to challenge the goddess, she was punished and transformed into a spider. The goddess participated in the myths of famous heroes. It was she who gave Perseus the shield he would use to decapitate Medusa. Athena also helped the hero Bellerophon to tame the winged horse Pegasus, and she also lent aid to Hercules in his famous labors. The goddess also played an important role in the Oresteia, a work covering the deeds of Orestes, son of Agamemnon. The young man was pursued by the Furies for having killed his mother. Orestes was judged, and half of the jurors found him innocent, as his mother was responsible for his father Agamemnon's death. The other half believed that such an act would not serve as an extenuating circumstance for the crime committed by the young man. Due to the impasse, Athena, who presided over the judgment, cast the tie-breaking vote. She acquitted Orestes, and from that day forward, the vote that broke a tie became known as Minerva's vote, as Minerva was the name by which the goddess was worshipped in Rome. On the Acropolis of Athens stands the famous Parthenon, one of the most visited tourist sites in the world. This was once a magnificent temple built to honor the goddess who is the city's patron. The goddess Athena is often depicted accompanied by an owl, the animal, consecrated to the goddess, and for this reason, the bird came to symbolize wisdom. It was also possible to find the goddess's symbol on the shields of Athenian warriors. Another symbol of the goddess is Athena's aegis, a powerful shield that once belonged to Zeus, to which Medusa's head was affixed. As Zeus's favorite daughter, many referred to her as the successor to the great god, for she inherited her mother's wisdom and her father's sense of justice and desire for order. Athena is a key figure in Greek mythology. The courage and wisdom inspired by the goddess made it possible for many characters to achieve incredible feats, and thanks to the goddess Athena, their names will echo through eternity. Chapter 9. Zeus, Supreme Lord of Olympus. Zeus is the supreme god of Greek mythology, and from his throne atop Mount Olympus, he sovereignly rules over the universe. The god is the son of Cronus and Rhea. His father was the Titan who ruled the world before Zeus's birth. An ancient prophecy said that one of Cronus's children would be more powerful than his father and would dethrone him. To avoid such a fate, Cronus devoured his children as soon as they were born. But Zeus managed to escape this fate. Rhea tricked Cronus into swallowing a stone instead of the baby. Meanwhile, Zeus was raised in secret and nursed by the goat Amalthea. As an adult, he defied his father and freed his siblings who were imprisoned in Cronus's stomach. A great war between gods and titans erupted, and this conflict became known as the Titanomachy. During this mighty battle, Zeus was gifted by the Cyclops with his powerful lightning bolts, which would become one of his symbols. After the victory over the Titans, Zeus divided power with his brothers. Poseidon would reign over the seas, Hades would be sovereign of the underworld, and Zeus would reign over the sky and earth. But before consolidating his power, he had to face and defeat the giants in the event that would become known as the Gigantomachy. Zeus would still be tested one last time when he faced the mighty monster Typhon. The god was even defeated in the first combat, but he had his revenge and managed to defeat and imprison Typhon under Mount Etna. As Lord of the universe, Zeus worked to restore order and justice in the world. The god was associated with the duty of hospitality. Those who received him well were very pleased and could be favored by the divinity, but those who disrespected this duty could be severely punished by Zeus. The god possesses various powers, such as controlling rains and storms, and through his lightning and thunder, he demonstrated how powerful Zeus was. Zeus was also capable of deciding the course of a battle. Whoever was favored by the god would certainly emerge victorious. For this reason, he is frequently represented with Nike, the goddess of victory, in his hand. The sovereign of the universe had the goddess Hera as his wife. With his queen, he had important children like Hephaestus, the god of the forge, and Ares, the god of war. But Zeus had various other loves besides Hera. The god fell in love with various goddesses, nymphs, and beautiful mortals, and therefore, he had a vast and glorious lineage. With the goddess Leto, he had the twin Olympian gods Apollo and Artemis. With the mortal Semele, he had Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy. Zeus was also the father of famous demigods like Hercules and Perseus. But of all his children, Athena, the goddess of wisdom, who was born from Zeus's head, was his favorite. His wife Hera was very jealous, and to escape her watchful eye, Zeus would assume the most diverse forms. He transformed into a bull to engage with the beautiful Europa, into a swan to seduce Leda, and into a cuckoo to win over his wife Hera. On one occasion, the gods of Olympus rebelled against Zeus and even imprisoned him. But thanks to the aid of Briareus, a gigantic hecatoncheire, he managed to free himself and put an end to the rebellion. The god was worshipped throughout the Greek world, and one of the main temples built in his honor was in Olympia, the birthplace of the Olympic Games. Inside this temple, there was an enormous statue sculpted by Phidias, the most renowned sculptor of ancient Greece. His work became one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The Olympic Games, which took place in the city of Olympia, were a grand celebration in honor of Zeus. In art, the god is represented as a mature, strong, and majestic man, wearing a crown of oak leaves and accompanied by an eagle, the animal consecrated to the god. In Rome, the god was known as Jupiter, and there he was also widely worshipped. His main temple was on the Capitoline Hill. The most powerful of the gods had his cult spread throughout Europe, thanks to the conquests carried out by the Roman legions. Conquered peoples would sometimes assimilate the god's cult, syncretizing him with native divinities. The cult of the Olympian gods may have declined, but the various moments protagonized by Zeus and the other Olympian gods continue to charm people of all ages. Chapter 10. Demeter, goddess of harvest and fertility. Demeter, in Greek mythology, is known as the goddess of harvests. She is part of the first generation of Olympian gods, who were the children of the Titan Cronus and the goddess Rhea. Among all the Olympians, Demeter and Hestia were considered the kindest and most benevolent goddesses. As a goddess of soil fertility, Demeter was especially worshipped by farmers, for without Demeter's blessings, the land would be as infertile as a desert. Demeter especially favored farmers who cultivated cereals, among which wheat was the grain consecrated to the goddess, with the wheat ear being one of the goddess's symbols. On altars where sacrifices were made in honor of the goddess, fruits and cereals were offered. Demeter has some children. One of them is known as Plutus, the god of abundance. Once, she was pursued by Poseidon, who wished to unite with her. The goddess transformed into a mare to try to escape the god, but Poseidon transformed into a stallion and mated with the goddess. From this union, the legendary black horse Arion and Despoina, the goddess of winter, were born. But Demeter's most famous descendant is Persephone, the fruit of the goddess's union with Zeus, and Persephone, the goddess of spring, was Demeter's favorite daughter. When Hades, the lord of the underworld, abducted Persephone, Demeter wandered the world in search of her beloved daughter. The goddess began to neglect her duties, and for this reason, the soil became infertile, and the world was consumed by winter. Upon discovering that her daughter had been abducted by the god of the underworld, the goddess threatened to make the world infertile forever if her daughter was not returned. But the bond between Hades and Persephone could not be undone. Thanks to the intervention of the gods, it was agreed that Persephone would spend part of the year with Hades and the other part with Demeter. When Persephone reunited with her mother, flowers bloomed and the soil became fertile. But upon returning to Hades, her mother grieved, and the world would turn cold and infertile again. This famous myth was used by the Greeks to explain the origin of the seasons, and in the Eleusinian Mysteries, very ancient initiatory rites, this myth symbolized the endless cycles of death and rebirth. Another moment in which the goddess is very prominent is the story of Erysichthon, the man who dared to cut down the forest consecrated to the goddess, and for this, he was cursed. Demeter made it so that the man, who had excessive ambition, was consumed by an unending hunger, and this condition would lead to his ruin. The goddess of agriculture was honored throughout Greece, for according to myths, it was she who taught men to sow and cultivate the land, and thus man could finally settle on the land and abandon his nomadic roots. For this reason, Demeter is attributed a decisive role in the emergence of the first cities. In art, the goddess is frequently represented holding ears of wheat and narcissus flowers. Sometimes she may also be represented holding a sickle or a torch, which she used in her search for Persephone. In ancient Rome, Demeter was known by the name Ceres, the goddess of cereals. There, she was the patroness of the island of Sicily. The goddess Demeter played an important role in the organization of Greek society, and her benevolence towards humanity made her one of the most adored goddesses in Greek mythology. Chapter 11. Eros, god of love and passion. Eros is the god of love and passion in Greek mythology. He is generally depicted as a beautiful winged youth carrying his famous bow. Many know him by the name Cupid, his Latin name, by which he was called in Rome. Romans generally represented the god of love in a more childlike way, and in many of his artistic representations, Eros resembled an angelic figure. But he was anything but a saint. He personified desire and lust. Eros ignited love and passion in the hearts of men. Under Eros's influence, men were capable of unthinkable acts of self-sacrifice for those whose hearts were taken by such a feeling. There are two famous versions for Eros's origin. In the most common one, he is the son of Aphrodite, another divinity linked to love, and Ares, the god of war. But according to Hesiod, Eros would be a primordial god who emerged from chaos, for the poet implies that without Eros's influence, all creation would be compromised, as it is his power that makes things unite. Love would be the fundamental force that allows the creation and preservation of life in the universe. But it is as Aphrodite's son or assistant that Eros gained more prominence in Greek myths. The duo was responsible for disseminating love and desire throughout the world, and using his bow, Eros struck his victims' hearts with his golden arrows. Those hit by these arrows immediately fell in love. Not even the gods were safe from Eros's precise arrows. Apollo, who was also an archer god, once mocked how Eros handled his bow, but he did not escape unpunished from this mockery. Eros struck Apollo's heart, making him fall in love with the nymph Daphne. But the story didn't end there. Eros shot one of his lead arrows into the nymph's heart. Such arrows instilled in their target an absolute repulsion for the other party. Thus, Apollo pursued Daphne, and she always rejected him. To escape the god's advances, the nymph was transformed into a laurel tree by her father. Apollo and Eros never got along very well after that, and for this reason, despite being the most beautiful of the gods, Apollo did not have much luck in love. The radiant god called Eros the cruelest of all gods, for to him, there was no greater pain than that of a broken heart. Eros was a mischievous god. He made no distinction between his targets. Young and old, rich and poor. All could become targets of the god of love. Sometimes he would even amuse himself and shoot his arrows aimlessly, purely for fun. But there is a story where Eros ended up becoming a victim of his own poison. There was a young woman who was considered the most beautiful of all. Some people began to dedicate honors to her that should only be paid to Aphrodite. Enraged, the goddess of love ordered her son to make the young woman fall in love with a terrible creature. But the young woman's beauty was so great that Eros was distracted and ended up wounding himself with his own arrow. The myth of the love between Eros and Psyche became one of the most celebrated stories in Greek mythology. Eros was sometimes represented holding torches. These were used to ignite the hearts of passionate lovers. Despite being one of the best-known gods who resided with his mother on Olympus, Eros traditionally is not one of the 12 great Olympian gods. In Roman mythology, his importance as Cupid is even lesser. But even without being as widely worshipped as the other Olympian gods, Eros continues to make the world move thanks to the power of love. Chapter 12. Aphrodite, Goddess of Beauty and Love. Aphrodite is the goddess of beauty and love in Greek mythology. In Rome, the goddess was known by the name Venus. Studies indicate that the cult of Aphrodite was imported from distant lands. The goddess is believed to have an Asian origin. There are a few different versions regarding the goddess's origin in Greek mythology. In the most famous, Aphrodite emerged from the foam created after the fall of Uranus's testicle, which had been thrown into the sea after the castration of the sky god by his son Cronus. The goddess emerged from the waters on a seashell and was carried by Zephyrus, the west wind, to a beach on the island of Cyprus. But according to Homer's version, the goddess would be the daughter of Zeus and the goddess Dione. Aphrodite personifies charm, sensuality, and the ideal of feminine beauty. Zeus married her to Hephaestus, the god of the forge, but the goddess was not famous for her fidelity. She had numerous lovers. the most famous of whom was Ares, the god of war. From this union, Eros, who was also known as Cupid, was born. Hephaestus was alerted to his wife's betrayal with the god of war. The god of the forge set a trap to catch them in the act. Ares and Aphrodite were caught and exposed in front of all the other gods. Hephaestus demanded punishment for the couple, but the god ended up becoming the target of jokes from the others. The goddess of beauty once fell madly in love with a young mortal named Adonis. But the love between the young man and the goddess was interrupted by the tragic death of the boy in a hunt. And when Queen Persephone also fell in love with Adonis, this sparked a dispute between the goddesses. To resolve the conflict, it was decided that the young man would spend part of the year with each of the goddesses. The or goddess Hera, Zeus's wife, was one of Aphrodite's greatest rivals. The Queen of Olympus hated Aphrodite and her son Eros because they were responsible for the countless times Zeus fell in love with his lovers. The rivalry between the goddesses only increased when the Trojan shepherd Paris chose Aphrodite as the most beautiful of the goddesses, to the detriment of Athena and Hera. Aphrodite promised Paris the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, who was Queen Helen of Sparta. The abduction of Helen by Paris was the spark that ignited the Trojan War. Aphrodite sided with the Trojans, protecting Paris and her son Aeneas, who fought against the bravest Greek heroes. The apple was a fruit consecrated in honor of the goddess of beauty, as the golden apple was given to the fairest of goddesses. The goddess of love was worshipped throughout the Greek world, but her main centers of worship were in Cyprus, her homeland, on the island of Cythera, and in Corinth, where her priestesses were also courtesans. Aphrodite was one of the most represented divinities in art. From classical antiquity to the present day, it is not uncommon to find the goddess in contemporary artistic expressions. Her most famous artistic representation is the beautiful statue of the Venus de Milo, displayed in the Louvre Museum in Paris. In painting, the Birth of Venus is one of Botticelli's masterpieces. As a very vain goddess, one of Aphrodite's symbols is the mirror. This symbol would represent the feminine sex in contrast to the spear, Ares' shield, which represents the masculine sex. As the goddess Venus, Aphrodite was especially revered in Rome, as she was the mother of the great hero Aeneas, one of the founding fathers of the Roman people. Figures like Julius Caesar and Nero claimed the goddess as one of their ancestors. This conferred special prestige on their family's genealogy. Due to her charm and power of seduction, it is almost impossible not to feel attracted and fascinated by the goddess of beauty and love. Chapter 13. Hephaestus, god of the forge. Hera was finally pregnant by Zeus. Excited, the goddess imagined how beautiful her son would be. Her expectations were enormous, as he would be the son of the king and queen of the heavens. However, the child was born, and Hera, upon seeing her son for the first time, was horrified. He was a hairy baby with rustic features, and his skin was darkened by soot. The goddess, dismayed, claimed that such a creature could not be her son and threw him from the top of Olympus towards the ocean. After a long fall, the small god violently crashed into the sea waters, becoming crippled and limping for the rest of his life. Hephaestus was rescued by Oceanus and Thetis, who quickly grew fond of the child. Unlike Hera, Thetis took him to the island of Lemnos, where he grew up playing with volcanoes. From childhood, Hephaestus developed unparalleled skill in the art of metallurgy. Using the heat of volcanoes, he created the most powerful weapons and the most beautiful jewelry. Upon reaching adulthood, he decided to return to Olympus. Hephaestus had produced a magnificent golden throne that was to be given to his true mother, the goddess Hera. Upon seeing her hideous son returning, Hera felt a chill down her spine. But upon seeing the throne he carried, she quickly forgot her discomfort. The goddess was very pleased with the gift and was eager to try it. The throne was truly divine, as beautiful as it was comfortable. However, upon trying to stand up, the goddess found herself trapped, and there was nothing or no one who seemed capable of freeing her, except Hephaestus, who knew the secret to freeing her. However, to free her, He demanded that his mother and the court of Olympus stop treating him with contempt and accept him back on Mount Olympus. Ashamed, the goddess accepted the demand and was freed, thus beginning to treat him with the respect he was due. Finally, Hephaestus made one last request that shocked everyone present. He asked permission to marry Aphrodite, the most beautiful among all goddesses. Hephaestus knew he was not handsome, but he also knew that it would be difficult for a woman to refuse to marry a man who would give her every luxury and security. Zeus appreciated the idea of such a marriage, for having such a beautiful and single goddess on Olympus would only attract quarrels and confusion among the gods. To everyone's surprise, with the blessing of the goddess Hera, the most beautiful of goddesses and the strangest of gods were married. In his forge on Olympus, Hephaestus created great works. Among them were Hermes' winged sandals, Achilles' armor, and Eros's bow and arrow. Hephaestus was truly a divine artist. Chapter 14. Hestia, goddess of the hearth and home. Hestia, the goddess of fire and protector of homes, is an Olympian goddess, daughter of Cronus and Rhea, but she is certainly the least known goddess among the 12 Olympian gods. Upon birth, she was swallowed by her father along with her siblings, as Cronus feared his children would usurp his power. After the victory of the Olympian gods over the Titans, Hestia came to be revered as the protective goddess of homes and dwellings. The goddess was courted by Apollo and Poseidon, but Hestia rejected both, for she had made a vow of chastity. Zeus honored the goddess, guaranteeing that she could remain chaste for all eternity. Hestia was a gentle and kind goddess, and for this reason, the goddess did not participate in the great divine battles. Due to her discreet character, few myths refer to the goddess of hearths, but men revered the goddess of sacred fire, constantly keeping a flame lit in their homes and temples. Practically all Greek cities had a sacred pyre dedicated to the goddess, on which the flames burned without interruption. If a group of colonists were to found a new city, they would take with them a little of the fire from the sacred pyre. In Rome, the cult of the goddess gained even more prominence. There she was known by the name Vesta, and in her temple, the sacred flame was tended by 6 priestesses who were known as the Vestal Virgins. These women had to remain virgins and pure. The Vestals were often chosen by lot from among the young women of Rome's noblest families. Hestia was one of the original 12 Olympian divinities, but with the growth of Dionysus's cult, he came to occupy the position that once belonged to Hestia. However, the goddess continued to personify the flames of hearths, and thus Hestia continued to provide warmth, comfort, and security to the homes of men. Chapter 15. Ares, god of war and bloodshed. Zeus, the supreme lord of Olympus, had married the goddess Hera. She was consumed by jealousy of Zeus's love for his favorite daughter, the goddess Athena. Hera desired above all to bear a strong, beautiful, and powerful son who would one day replace his father, as was written in an ancient prophecy. The queen of the heavens' wish was granted, and she gave birth to a beautiful child who received the name Ares. The young god grew stronger each day. While still young, signs of his wrath and brutality were already evident. As an adult, he received magnificent armor and a golden helmet. He was the model of the perfect warrior. Now Ares was the god of war, and his desire for bloodshed horrified the other gods. Due to his violent and uncontrollable nature, even some gods feared him, and he was therefore ill-regarded by most divinities. During battles among men, he delighted in the carnage. He did not typically support one side of the conflict because he was more just, honorable, or courageous. He tended to favor those who were more violent and brutal, but sometimes he helped those who paid him due homage and honors. During the Trojan War, Zeus made the following statement about Ares. "To me, he is the most detestable of the gods who inhabit Olympus, for he loves only discord, war, and combat." Zeus detested him so much that he said if Ares were not Hera's son, he would certainly have been expelled from Olympus. However, Ares also had divine followers. Among them was Eris, the goddess of discord, who with her nefarious powers created all kinds of misunderstandings and disputes among men. The goddess brought with her her son Limos, the god of famine, Algea, the goddess of pain, Ponos, the god of toil, and Lethe, the goddess of forgetfulness, who made men forget the presence of the gods on the battlefield. After Ares and his retinue passed, came the Keres, who were divinities of violent deaths. They drank the blood of those who died on the battlefields and dragged those who deserved it directly to Tartarus. Athena, the goddess of strategic warfare, directly opposed the bloodthirsty god, defeating Ares on several occasions. However, not even she was capable of quenching the god of war's thirst for blood. Only one goddess was able to appease Ares' violent heart. Her name was Aphrodite, the goddess of love.